Hello, my name is Ryan Verbecki, and I am the manager of the Principal Architects at Vertana. Today we are going to go over a short video on performance impact analysis. The purpose of this video is to show you how to use VirtualWisdom's reports and analytics to help you identify performance impacts within your environment, along with to complete a root cause analysis of the source of the impact. The integrations we will use in this video are hardware probe integration, switch integration, our VMware integration, which will be referenced in the analytics. The services reports we will use are fiber channel performance and fiber channel ESX host latency investigation. The analytics we will use are trend matcher. Why should you investigate performance events? Overall high read and write response times have significant impacts to servers and applications across the environment. Those performance impacts could lead to long-standing I/O or aborts within the fabric. This could have potentially significant impacts on utilization and overall server or application throughput. Impacts to throughput can lead to long-running scheduled jobs for servers and applications, and overall poor performance on critical applications could have a financial impact to the company. We will now go into a VirtualWisdom demonstration. To begin investigating, we're going to want to go to the reporting section on the left-hand side of the screen. Within here, we're going to want to look for the performance report, so I've filtered down to performance, and the one that I'm looking for is the VI performance report. So I'm going to go into this report, and this particular report looks at performance by application down through the host and HBAs through the storage array and storage ports. What we're going to do is look through this report and see if we can identify a performance impact within our infrastructure. For purposes of this video, I'm going to go ahead and skip the top section, which is related to the application, and I'm going to start looking from the host perspective or HBA ports. So in this particular section, looking at HBA port performance, I'm going to look at my read response time and my write response times. And what I instantly notice on the right-hand side of the screen is I have a performance impacting event where I'm going up to upwards of close to 3 millisecond response times when I was originally getting well under 1 millisecond. So what I want to do is identify the device, and you can see by this pop-up that it's ESX05. So I know that I have an ESX host that's having some sort of response time increase. And I'm going to use this one for our investigation purpose in this video. The next row down, you can see a similar trend. And if I highlight that, you can see it's coming out of that same host, ESX05, and it's pushing around 1600 megabytes per second of read traffic on both HBAs. We can see the read I/O distributed, and it looks like we're hitting more than just that ESX05. We also have read I/O coming out of ESX06 and ESX04, but we do notice that when we have a significant workload increase, we have a response time increase. If I keep scrolling down, I can also see during those same time frames, if I look at write workload, we also have a heavy write workload happening. So what it looks like is we're pulling in a bunch of data with a heavy read workload, and we're pushing data out with a heavy write workload. Additionally, I will see an increase in write I/O over here as well. If I continue to scroll down, we're going to get into the storage array section. And underneath the storage array section, I'm going to turn off this array and this array, because if you notice, this particular trend matches the issue that we are seeing right above. And I can instantly tell that the array that's being impacted is my pure array. So one of the pure arrays that's servicing this ESX05 host is having some sort of performance impact event. Its response times were about 0.2 to 0.3 milliseconds, and now they're averaging in the array as a whole at about 6 milliseconds. If I scroll down, I can see what the workload is, and I can see that pure array is pushing over 3,000 megabytes per second, and it's pushing slightly under 6,000 IOs. If I continue to scroll down, what I'll do is look for other matching trends, and underneath here, I'm going to go ahead and turn off this VNX ports because I see a matching trend behind it. And sure enough, I'm now looking at storage port performance, and I see an average read completion time on all 4 of my ports goes up for my pure array. And I see it happen multiple times. I also see my write response times go up. If I turn off some of these VNX and VMAX ports right here, you'll see that right here. Let's get down and turn a few more of these off so we can get down to our pure ports. We have our pure ports down here that have a subtle impact on them, as well as we also have some VMAX ports that have some impact. So it looks like I'm having multiple ports that are being impacted, but the most significantly impacted ports are going to be related to my pure and a few of my VMAX ports. I continue to scroll down, you're going to see here's the workload on those storage ports, evenly distributed workload across 4 pure storage ports. And then you can see in the background here, we have some ITLs that match. So I can actually get all the way down to see which particular ITLs are impacted here. And if I turn some of these off until I see those ones that have the trends, you're gonna see here's the ones I see that match. And I can see it's LUN 238. So it's syslab ESX05 talking to peer ports, and it's LUN 238, and their average response time on the ITLs gets up to about a little over 6 milliseconds. So what we were able to do in this report is quickly identify a host that seemed to have some sort of performance level event. We're able to identify that the performance related event was related to workload that was coming out of the particular host that was driving it. So what we want to do now is take that particular host, which was the ESX05, and we want to go to our ESX host latency investigator report to dig in deeper to what we see going on with that host. To get to that host latency investigator report, we'll want to go back to the reporting section, so you can click back on reports, or you can hit the breadcrumb bar at the top. Either way, it will take us back to the main reporting window, and from the main reporting window, we'll want to get to that latency investigator report. So I'm going to go ahead and type in start to type latency in there, and you're going to see I have 2 different ones. I have ESX host latency, and I have host latency. The one we're going to want to use, because we know it was an ESX host that we saw that was impacted driving the workload, and it was ESX05, we're going to use this particular report. So we knew, based on our previous report looking at performance and identifying a performance level impact, from there we knew it was an ESX05 and we knew it was a pure array. So the first thing that you'll want to do is populate the host that you were looking at, which is ESX05 at the top, so it'll filter to it. The next thing that we want to filter to is the particular storage array. So this will let me look at the ESX host and the particular storage array. And we knew that this was a pure array, so I'm going to go and type in pure. My array will pop up. I'll select that. And now I have my ESX host latency investigator report populated with the server we were looking at, as well as the array we were looking at. What you can instantly see is the top report's looking at fiber channel conversations, and this is read response times, and this is write response times. And you can see I have a whole bunch of issues with response time for reads, as well as I see subtle increases in my write response times as well. And that's looking down all the way to the individual fiber channel conversation. If I scroll down just a little bit, we're going to look at it from the HVA port perspective, and you can see my average response time jumps up to 3.4 from under 1 millisecond. My write response times jump up to a little under 2.6 milliseconds, and they were originally under 0.2, right around 0.2 milliseconds. If I keep going down a little bit, you're going to see from ESX host perspective, you're going to see average read completion time and average read array latency. So what this report lets you do right here in this particular chart is it lets you compare what the read completion time is versus what we think is read array latency, so latency within the array. So we can see that the total exchange completion time at this particular time frame for reads took about 3.7 milliseconds, but the latency from the read array perspective, or what it looks or appears to be something from the array, or the array having trouble getting the exchanges out of the array, is about 2.5 milliseconds. So from here, it gives me an indication on, do I think the issue is at the array, or do I think the issue is at the host? Initially, it'll look like from this perspective that there's some sort of delay within the array because it's the majority of the read completion time. On this right chart, it's going to look at the yellow's write host latency, write completion time, and green, it's going to be write array latency, as well as write acknowledgement latency. So when I highlight one of these particular spikes, you're going to see that green trend says the response time is about 3 milliseconds. The blue trend is going to be the write array latency, which is 1.5. So it's saying that my total exchange completion time per write took 3 milliseconds, but 1.5 of that was waiting on array side latency. The yellow line is going to be the host side latency, so it's thinking that from the perspective of we replied to the host until we saw the host send us the information we replied on, we can see that it's about 0.6 milliseconds, so very little delay on the host side. And the write acknowledgement latency is how long it takes the array to even acknowledge your write to begin with. And it took almost 1 millisecond to even acknowledge a write, which is a significant amount of time, since write should be acknowledged really fast. So we know that it appears that it looks like there's something on the array side that's causing a slowdown to write I/O as well as read I/O during this particular event. If I continue to scroll down, what I notice right at that time frame, looking at buffer credit starvation, is on my transmit channel, which is the transmit from the array to the host, I see my flow control was at 0, but when that workload from that host that we identified, ESX05, picks up, we see the flow control hits 20%. So the reason why the array looks like it's slowing down is because we're running out of buffer credits on the link from the array back to the switch. So the array is struggling to respond because it's seeing some level of buffer credit impact, and that's why we see an increase in our response times. If I continue to scroll down, we don't have any ISL, so no ISL impacts in this environment, no port channels. This is looking at aborts. We don't see any aborts or high IOs there. What we do see is the read completion time, including failures, kind of goes up with those trends as we expected. And if I continue to scroll down, when I start to drill into the host metrics, I can instantly see that ESX05 server is at 100% read utilization. So we're exceeding a capacity event in the environment. The host cannot ingest any more data based on the workload it's requesting. When we see that, we see the buffer credits that I showed you above start to increase because we're running out of buffer credits, running into some sort of starvation event. We also see it's a significant increase in IO size, so it's larger block IO that's also contributing to this, larger block read and larger block write IO. And then down, if I keep going down, I'm going to look at the storage arrays perspective now. From within the storage array, I can see average read array latency. In the pure array, I see the read workload is hitting a little over 3,000 megabytes per second, but my array side latency goes up to 3 milliseconds. So when I get a significant increase in read workload, I see a flow control type event running out of buffer credits because of a capacity event on a host, and then I see my average response time start to increase for reads, as well as a subtle increase over here on the writes, but the writes aren't impacted quite as much because writes are mostly going to be on the receive channel, not the transmit channel, which is what I showed you impacted above. If I come down a little bit further, even some of my non-read write conversations show a subtle increase. So non-read write IO is impacted as well in this environment. I don't see any sort of physical errors in the infrastructure at all as well. So instantly, I was able to identify that we had a performance impact on the host. Let me go back up to the top and we'll recap this. We saw a performance impact on a host. The performance impact looked like it was on the array side because most of the delay was on the read array latency and the write array latency. I was able to look and see that I had a transmit credit issue on my port that matched my performance impacting events, showing that the reason why the array looked slow was because we were running out of buffer credits in the fabric to be able to transmit frames from the storage ports to the switch. And the reason for that is we're getting a capacity-based event on our host right here, which is ESX05, which is causing a back pressure down to the storage ports. So to address this issue, you would want to address the capacity-based event that you're seeing in the infrastructure on your host or the particular workload. So we'll get into a recap of things that you can check to address the performance impact. But before we do that, I'm going to show you an alternative method of going into Trend Matcher to do some trend matching around the particular performance event to see the impact of everything in the infrastructure and where the impact is coming from. To do that, you go on the left-hand side of the screen, and you're going to want to click on the analytics section. When I say OK and go to the analytics section, you're going to see the Trend Matcher analytic here at the top, and we're going to go ahead and click Run New. Once in Trend Matcher, you're going to want to click on where it says Application, and we were looking at an ESX host, so I'm going to go ahead and filter to an ESX host. The ESX host we were looking at was ESX05. So we'll go ahead and search for that. This was the host we were looking at. And the performance impact we were looking at was looking at read completion times average read completion right here. So we're going to select that. And then we're going to keep the same time frame that we were originally looking at. And then you have two options. You can do quick mode or robust mode. Well, I'm going to set the trend for the trend to pop up we were looking at. If you do quick mode, it's going to do a faster search, looking at a little bit more of a large scale features, not quite as less granularity and those type of things. So the process will go a lot faster in trying to find pattern matches. You have robust mode, which is a more comprehensive search and analysis that can be much slower. Reason for that is it's going to use finer data points and do much more comprehensive search to try to find a more accurate pattern match. Here's the base trend again. Down below, the common situations to analyze for are fiber channel workload drift for applications. You can do search all connected entities with conversations, or you can search all connected entities without conversations, which is going to be much faster because you're going to search less entities and data points. You can do a targeted situation if you know exactly what you want to look for and pattern match against, or you can do a legacy search, which is not limited to any particular situation. In this particular instance, that's the one I'm going to use. And I'm going to go ahead and leave it with on quick mode above, and down below, if I click on run, it's going to go out and do that pattern matching and find what pattern matches this across the infrastructure. For purposes of this video, I've already run this analytics, so I'm going to jump back over to the analytics section. Underneath the analytics section, you're going to see outputs. Underneath outputs, you will see per example quick mode. I'm going to click on that one. We'll give it a second to load. And while this loads, I'm going to go ahead and scroll up to the top here. You're going to see we ran it on the ESX host, the ESX05 we mentioned, average read completion time. We use quick mode, as we previously said. Here's our base trend. We chose the legacy search, and below you're going to see what it found as some of the examples of the pattern matches. So one thing you're going to see is we see the average read and write IO size matches. So there's a change in average read and write IO size. On storage port Vmax, we saw some average write IO size changes as well on a few different ports there, so we know that there was some impact to those and some workload changes there as well that matched a particular pattern. If I scroll down, you're going to see the same ESX05 HBA2 port that we previously saw in the reports, and we're going to see the read payload rate increase on that, which matches. Again, here 1621 megabytes per second, down one path when we see the subtle increase in performance. And then down below, you're going to see some of the impacted storage ports based on that HBA that we chose above to run the pattern match against. And you can see the read payload rate increases on some of the pure ports. If I scroll down a little bit, we're pushing about 772 megabytes per second when we see that subtle performance increase on that host. And then if I scroll down just a little bit, you can see here's a VM showing some more impact. We see some Vmax LUNs, and a few more pure storage ports. Down here at the bottom, we're going to see an ERP ETL data store. We also see this particular database. So if I expand this database out, I now know that it's one of this particular VM running on that ESX05 server that's driving the workload. I can also see that the database that's likely impacted is this pure ERP ETL data store that's running on that ESX05 server. So I was able to look at not only the impact that was happening from performance perspective, I was able to see storage port workload increases, host workload increases, identify the data store and the VM that we see the particular workload increases to when we see that back pressure event that we identified in our ESX host latency investigator report. You can also look at the negative impact as well versus the positive impact. The positive is going to be a positive match. The negative is going to be the adverse. So if I switch over to negative, I can see, and I'll just do one example here. Here's the ESX VM ordering system app 1. When I see that performance impact happen at other hosts that drives the high workloads which cause the buffer credit starvation event because of a capacity event, I can see the disk read rate on some of my other hosts are impacted the opposite. Here's the ordering systems pushing 132, 137, 134, or so on. And then when we have that performance impact and that buffer credit starvation event, now it starts pushing less workload. So this is what can happen when you have a flow control event that's driven based on a capacity event. So in summary, we're able to identify the host performance impact using the services reports. We use the services performance report and the ESX host latency investigator report to identify the impacted hosts and the source driving the performance impact. Alternatively, we were able to run the Trendmetric analytics against the source hosts and the read performance impact to identify the reason for the impact as well as other impacted infrastructure components. In final analysis, we were able to determine that the host workload was at capacity, resulting in back pressure causing array performance impact due to credit starvation. Example of next steps to take to address the issue would be as follows. Review the workload on the identified ESX hosts. Review speed mismatches to potentially alleviate capacity-based events driving buffer starvation and the associated performance impact. If necessary, potentially throttle workload to avoid capacity-based events causing credit starvation and performance impacts. If multiple VMs are driving capacity issue on the ESX host, rebalance VM workloads if possible to potentially resolve the capacity event. And depending on the environment and the source of the array impacted, you could potentially use QoS to limit resource impact. This concludes our video. Thank you for watching.